Teachers of Reddit, what is the weirdest excuse you've ever heard that turned out to be true? One of the girls I know from uni works in a college here. College is a name for vocational school, and one of her groups of students jokingly said they died when someone was absent from classes. So one day it went morbidly wrong when she asked why. Say, Dave was absent. The group replied that he died. She laughed and said okay. But seriously, and the class was just silent. A similar thing happened in my HS. Teacher would call attendance every day, and when they got to this guy's name, who was late every single day, someone would say something to the effect of he died after his name was called, and we would all cheer and laugh, and say things like he has risen. When he would walk in 5 minutes later half asleep. He was a hard-working kid who probably put in 40 hours a week at his job, but didn't care much for school. One day near the end of the school year, at the end of class, the principal walked in and took the teacher aside, and she came in looking stunned and completely white and just sat there speechless. The bell rang, and when we got out into the hall, his GF was laying on the floor hysterical with all the security guards attending to her. The poor kid had died when he fell asleep at the wheel on the way to school and flipped his car into a ditch. I don't remember anyone in that class talking at all for the remaining few weeks of school. It was truly one of the most sobering things I've experienced. My cousin took my homework on vacation to Venezuela. At least the homework had a good time. I was a student. It was the first day of school. There were 6 of us who were late. The reason? The school bus stop was moved to a new location. We all piled into my mother's car. We went to the principal's office. The office manager said notice letters were sent to us. So she checked her log. The notices were never sent out. My bio teacher told me this story. During a biology lesson they were outside. My school is near a small lake. A student ended up falling in and getting their legs stuck in the mud. The bio teacher had to rescue them and hose them off behind the school. The next period teacher didn't believe them despite the student being soaking wet. I had a student who told me he was going to miss one of the exams because he was visiting a famous rapper in Florida with his family. He told me that the rapper, who at the time was a relatively big deal, all over the radio, was his cousin, and his family was flying out for a show and he couldn't skip it. I mean, I would have let him make up the exam anyway. I don't really care as long as he takes it. But all his peers and I were kind of like, yeah, right, okay, whatever you say man. He was telling the truth. When he got back from Florida, said famous rapper Skyped into our poetry class and chatted with my students about poetry and lyrics and such. It was actually really cool. I had a student miss class because one of his co-workers at his job had been arrested for child and management needed him to cover the shift the guy was supposed to work before he was arrested. The student brought in proof too, thankfully not in the form of CP. I had a 6th grader come into class very sleepy during test day. I asked her why, and she said she is sleeping next to her dead grandma in the living room and has been too scared to sleep. I asked her parents about this. Turns out it's a cultural practice of theirs to keep a dead relative in the home for a few days while the spirit makes its journey to the afterlife. I was the student. My grandparents were driving me to school and my neighbor's cow got out of their field, completely blocking the road. Because cows are stubborn and it took us forever to help my neighbor get the cow back in. I was late. Knowing my teacher was a my grandma came down to the class with me to let him know what happened. He didn't believe her. I still can't wrap my head around a teacher at a school in a small farming town didn't believe I was late because a cow was blocking the road. Not a teacher, but a fellow student in my grad program last week. Sorry, I have to go. I just got a notification that my TV fell on my cat. I gave this one. I was in college. I went back to my house between classes only to find my roommates barricaded inside by police. Why, you might ask? There was a bull moose in our side yard and the fish and game people were very concerned. So my lab isn't until 3 or something. And meanwhile there's like 8 officers having a standoff with a moose in my yard. This continues until someone decides that the moose is an imminent threat and they're going to try to tranquilize it. So they try that and it fails. So now they're going to kill the moose. It gets to be about 2:45 and I need to leave for my class, and I'm summarily informed by the armed officer that my lawn is not safe and I'm to stay inside. So I emailed my professor and was like, look, I know you're not going to believe this, but I'm barricaded in my house and they won't let me leave. I assume this will be on the news tonight. Turns out it was on the news, they interviewed me, and I got an exemption on that lab. He told me later that he was going to 100% fail me because it was the worst excuse ever until he saw the news story. In case it wasn't immediately obvious. Yes, this occurred in Vermont. Because where else would this be a problem? I have a cousin who went to his math class and turned in his homework without any proof showing he worked on the problem. When asked why he didn't show his work, he responded with, "A NASA rocket scientist showed me a better way." Well, no one believes him. Until they called his dad and he had to explain they had a family friend from out of town staying at their house, and yes, he was actually a NASA rocket scientist. Not a teacher, but my dog literally ate my homework in high school. I had to read The Great Gatsby in English and I remember my teacher asking me where my copy of the book was. I told him my dog ate it and he gave me that. Really? Bro, look. Took out the completely destroyed copy and the expression on his face when he realized I wasn't lying was priceless. My pet rats dragged my history homework into their cage and modified it to fit in with the aesthetic of their shredded paper nest. I told the teacher the next day, who didn't believe me until I could get my dad to vouch for me. Teach was all well if she wasn't lying. Why didn't she bring the remainder in as proof? My dad. Because the papers were shredded and covered in rat urine. I didn't come to school because I was in Mexico at my hypnotist. Yeah, didn't think one would take a day trip to Mexico for a hypnotist and be back the next day, but that was in fact what had happened. As a graduate TA for undergrad students, I was teaching an online course and all assignments had to be submitted by midnight. A student emailed me, "This is important," and said her internet was down and she couldn't submit the paper. As in, logged into her email on the internet to email me that her internet was down. The way the class was run, if she didn't submit the paper by midnight she got a 0 for the assignment. I replied to her email, "Remember, her internet is down, that if she brought me a hard copy of the paper she could still get her grade." She shows up at my apartment 10 minutes later. I hosted study groups in the community room with her hard copy paper and a half-melted internet router. She had emailed me from her smartphone that she had for her internship. This was early in the smartphone surge and few people had them. Girl got her grade and was still in touch. She proved herself to be an incredibly dedicated student and is now in graduate school herself. Not a teacher, but I'm from a small town, and one day like half of my high school was late because a senior decided on his last day he was going to ride his ride-on lawn mower to school in cut-off Daisy Dukes and a cowboy hat. There's one main access road to the school. He backed up for like half an hour between buses and cars. You won't be surprised to know that he goes by the nickname Bubba. When I was in 3rd grade I was late to school because my dog had puppies inside a hollow log in the woods beside my house. And I was the only one small enough to crawl inside and get the puppies out. Not me, but a friend. Substitute teaching for a day. Walks into class, "Hi, I am your teacher for the day. I am told you have homework, can you hand it in now please?" Student raises hand, "I don't have my homework." Teacher, "And why's that?" Student, "We weren't given homework." Teacher, "Oh yes you were." Student, "Nope." Teacher gets angry about how she knows they were given homework and just because she was a new teacher didn't mean that they can walk over her. Different teacher walks in. Turned out the sub-teacher was in the wrong classroom. One time my teacher's dog ate my homework. Since she thought it was unfair for me to redo a long assignment, she gave me full credit based on the benefit of the doubt. I was the student my friend had to use for an excuse. So me and my best friend had a project due in science. And my mom went into labor about 4 that morning. I spent the day at the hospital, not school. When the teacher yelled at him for not having the project because it was on my computer, he just said to her nonchalantly, "His mom is in labor, it's on his computer." I was told the look on her face was priceless. Missing class because my grandmother died. I heard it 3 times from the same student. I heard it from her twice freshman year, which was pretty suspicious, and once her junior year. I asked our principal. Turns out all 3 were legit and one of her grandmothers was from a second marriage. Also not a teacher sorry, but one time while cycling to school my sister's school bag fell off and into a creek and I went wading into the water to get it out. Arrived in class with no shoes and wet socks and pants drained to my knees. But the teacher straight up didn't believe me anyway. I told a teacher I was late because a car hit and ran me on my bike and propelled me into a ditch. But that I was fine. She only believed me because, coincidentally, her boyfriend was my bike mechanic, which I knew, small town, and he confirmed for her that my bike had most definitely been damaged in a manner consistent with my story.